Hello and welcome to this session at CloudTalk Online. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you've all been enjoying the content delivered today, but there's obviously still lots more to explore. And I guess they've saved the best for last, and that's probably our session. Okay, so welcome to this particular talk. I'm Richard Simon. This particular talk is around where do you start your cloud journey. So we're going to be kind of exploring some of the challenges around that and some of the ideas and kind of talking about some sort of best practices. Obviously, this session is effectively a summary only. If you have any questions as we're going through, please put those into the question tab and we'll try and answer those towards the end. So as I said, I'm Richard Simon. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Multi-Cloud Global. We are a cloud-native startup consultancy in the UK. I also run a YouTube channel called The Cloud Therapists, and that's all around cloud-native talks. And let me now introduce my guest, who is going to be sort of having this fireside chat with me. So I'll hand it over to you, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I don't know if it's best for last or best to give me a chance to wake up in the US where it's still kind of early in the morning, but
maybe that.
Yeah, so my name is Barry Cooks. I'm the CTO for DigitalOcean. I've been in the technology business for almost 25 years now, actually, based out in California in the Silicon Valley. A lot of experience in both enterprise and startups, so it kind of run the gambit. It's as they say, over the years. DigitalOcean, for those who aren't familiar with us, is a cloud company. So you can think of us as similar to, but not the same as AWS or some of the other big global clouds. We are global. We in fact have 2/3 of our customers are outside the United States. And our focus, our differentiation is that we're really focused on developers, SMBs, technology startups, with an emphasis on taking them through their cloud journeys and having a sort of very specific workflows to assist that class of community that we think has been underserved by the big global clouds.
Cool. Well, Barry, it's great to have you on. So I really appreciate you coming in and sort of to give your thoughts. So let's kind of just really start around the sort of the cloud market. What's kind of DigitalOcean's sort of take on the sort of current cloud climate? What have you seen with customers? What they've been asking for? What's their kind of challenges?
I think cloud is clearly the default for most customers at this point. If you're starting a new business or you're beginning a journey as a developer, the cloud is what is enabling, rapid growth, rapid evolution in technologies. What we see in our side is a lot more expansion, a lot more desire for additional services. That more as a service offerings is typically what people are looking for. The way that we look at it is, if you're coming into the cloud, what you want to do is focus on your business problem. And the more things you can consume from underlying layers as a service, the less sort of a split focus you have to have. And you get a focus on your business problem and take advantage of these underlying tiers for all the reasons that people deeply care about the cloud. It really enables you to have this level of focus and not have to go build expertise in a collection of different areas. Over the focus on the business problem. I think the other thing that's interesting about the cloud, especially for SMBs, if you were to rewind the clock, as an SMB to have some form of global reach would have been nearly impossible pre-cloud. And now it's actually, a few button clicks, swipe a credit card, and you can reach people in any country in the world, right? And so that enabler is something that we see a lot of people trying to take advantage of.
Cool. And what would you say sort of has been the sort of some of the challenges around COVID and sort of, recent issues, lockdowns and things like that?
Yeah, I think the lockdown has certainly driven a lot more people to the cloud. I think learning and collaboration and things is all driven dramatically up during the various lockdowns that have gone on. I think one of the biggest challenges I see with people just they're getting out and starting a new business or focusing on growing their technology stack on the cloud, it's important to understand your scope, right? The cloud is this amazing benefit in that you don't have to understand the infrastructure deeply. You don't have to run the operating systems. You don't have to, become an expert in data centers and things. But something that a lot of people sometimes will forget is if you ship it, you own it. So if you have customers that are downstream from you, they actually don't care where in that deeply complicated stack the problem happened. They're buying something from you, and ultimately you own that. You own the relationship, and you need to solve their problem, not push it onto someone else. So I think one of the big challenges is really around understanding that even if you want to leverage 18 different components of open source because it enables you to go fast, ultimately you still own making all 18 of those things work together to solve the business problem for your customer. And if you don't think about it from that perspective, you will lose your customers really fast when you run into a problem somewhere in that stack and you don't know what to do about it. Because ultimately everything is still running just like it did, it's just running somewhere else.
Indeed, yeah. So obviously, I mean, as you said, I think it is all about sort of that value proposition, isn't it? And being able to deliver on that and actually take advantage of the cloud in that way. I mean, certainly I've seen, there's been, generally speaking, a lot of sort of talk around sort of, mobilization of the workforce, people working from home, obviously over this sort of last 18 months or so, more democratization of the data because you have to do more collaborative work, as well as sort of the headaches of dealing with security around all of that as well, and maintaining the sort of the corporate security and governance around that as well. And I certainly have seen that a lot with enterprise customers from my perspective. Interestingly, I was reading a report, I think it was by Google, that actually said that despite the pandemic and all the sort of lockdowns and sort of changing way of working, a lot of organizations have actually continued their digital transformation plans. And if not actually accelerated them as well, which has been sort of quite an interesting, I think, outcome from sort of the last 18 months. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more about the sort of challenges, typical challenges that really sort of your customers have been sort of encountering. What's kind of, what sort of things have you seen from them? Any sort of particular themes in terms of adopting cloud and things like that?
I think one thing that we definitely see is people approaching cloud and not recognizing the level of complexity that a true microservices architecture means. I think you run into kind of two camps. One is I already have an app and I'm going to pick my app up and I'm going to put it on the cloud and I'm going to be happy, which usually doesn't work out very well because it wasn't designed to run in that environment. You're not taking advantage of the cloud. And then for the people who do really want to move in cloud native from the start, lots of startups, SMBs, they know that they're going to go that path. And I think where people get challenged by the microservices architecture is the level of complexity and the connectiveness between those services is extremely difficult to think about later. And so one thing that is absolutely critical is really building observability into your stack at the start. If you're not thinking about that problem before you start putting customers in, you are in for a lot of pain trying to debug a stack like that, where you're trying to figure out who's talking to whom at a particular point in time. You won't be able to unwind it if you hadn't thought about the need for that level of observability in advance. It tends to be a real challenge for a lot of folks. And I think similarly, thinking about your design pattern overall, like how are you approaching this? What is it for you that's important around scalability? What are your bottlenecks? How are you going to scale this up when you need to? That's another space where people try to take advantage of the cloud, turn on auto scaling, do some things in this nature, but you still have this overall design, this overall architecture. You kind of have to understand which pieces scale in what order and how are they dependent upon each other to make that experience seamless. And I've definitely seen people being challenged in that area quite a bit. And I think it's a huge point of leverage for people in the cloud to be able to take advantage of that scale. I mentioned before, one of the great things about the cloud is your reach to customers is just enormous, and you can choose where you'd like to be in the world based on your desires to reach certain types of customers. But you still need to understand, own, and operate all of that complexity for your side of the application stack, and you need to understand what your cloud vendor is providing you. I think the classic example I've seen with people is remember the cloud is still, it's a data center you don't own. There's data centers in different places. It's still hardware. Things still go wrong even in the cloud. You're taking advantage of somebody else's expertise around security, around scalability, around data center monitoring and operations. But things will still go wrong. And if you don't understand those fault boundaries as you're designing and deploying your systems, a cloud outage will be an outage for you. If you do understand those boundaries, an outage of the cloud doesn't actually impact you. Maybe your customers see a little more latency, but you're still up, right? And ultimately, that's the kind of design center you want to be thinking about for your customers, because especially as you're small and you're trying to grow, disappointing customers is a good way not to have any left. And so you got to really think about that problem as you're starting out, not after the fact.
Sure. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, again, from sort of an enterprise perspective, I see kind of challenges around culture. So kind of going from sort of the data center monolithic application sort of culture and processes around that. That being a challenge. Again, obviously security, it's a different ball game when it goes into the cloud. So you guys kind of look at that. I think I've done some blogs and talks and write-ups on that as well. And obviously overall sort of having.
I was just going to say, Richard, your point on culture is actually a really good one, right? Because one of the things that I talked to a lot of startup people, and I always joke, their number one priority is just getting customers, not scaling to 100,000 customers. It would be awesome if I had 10, right? Which is what somebody was telling me the other day when I was talking. And so when you're kind of starting that out, the thing about the culture that is so different now is it is really this 24/7, DevOps style culture, where you need to assume you have a methodology laid out, a way to control and operate and watch your components all the time, right? Because if you're going to try to have worldwide reach, it's daylight somewhere all the time. And you will have people that if they see an issue, they need you to respond. And so you kind of need to think about that as you start out. Am I a DevOps culture? Do I have the people who are able to jump into problems whenever they might occur and wherever they might occur?
Indeed, yeah, and sort of, I guess, sort of final point for me would be sort of around governance, really, and sort of just having that overall management control over everything. Excellent. So in terms of sort of, you mentioned sort of startups and SMBs. I appreciate that's kind of the sort of custom base that you work with, and that's really fantastic because obviously those have a green field to start from. So that's really fantastic. Sometimes I wish I could have that as well with my customers. So just in terms of focusing on them, what kind of would be, how can they sort of avoid some of these challenges that everybody else sort of has in terms of growing pains?
I think one of the things to do is to write down your goals. Like what is it you're trying to solve for? So sort of have a picture in your head. Like I said, if your goal is to get that first 10 customers, you don't need to design a very complicated architecture that you think could scale to 100,000. You're going to have an opportunity to take a second crack at that, once you've proven that you've got customers that actually care, because one of the big things is change is constant in this sort of startup world and as you're getting off the ground. And so laying out a design on paper first is like, here are my goals. This is how I think I can achieve goal set 1. This is how I'm going to achieve goal set 2. Let's assume some success and just be prepared to pivot. Because typically you start down a path and you will pivot. You will not have that first idea be exactly what you end up with as a successful entity over time. And so I think that design on paper first helps you because you can reference it. You can go back and say, am I still trying to do this or do I need to change this, right? And it kind of forces that logical thinking that keeps you kind of focused on, is this still the goal or do I want to change it? If I want to change it, now I know I've changed it. Now how do I change the rest of my thinking associated with that? I think that can be an enormous help for people.
Okay. I mean, I guess it's kind of maybe sort of a different perspective for sort of more established enterprises, I guess. I mean, certainly if they are going down the route of sort of, wanting to do cloud, and some of them are sort of along that journey already, some are sort of on that journey but struggling, and some haven't even started yet. I guess kind of for me, and the things that I've seen would be endorsement from the sort of the C-level, getting that approval, getting that sort of support and backing. I think is really important. I think once you've established that, the empowerment to have a strategy and to execute on it, and to actually give the teams like the Cloud Center of Excellence. You and I think I mentioned this a couple of times in our previous discussions. But things like Cloud Center of Excellence team having sort of the teeth and the backing, the endorsement to be able to actually make the decisions and be empowered to make those decisions. And then finally, in terms of ongoing cost management, again, so as from the sort of having that from the outset, need to control the costs and sort of introduce automated process like FinOps, for example, to to help with that?
I think that cost one is one that a lot of people that are new or doing their first round of deployments often overlook. And that surprise factor is usually a pretty unfortunate one when it's the bill. I think, a lot of clouds have very complicated pricing models. I mean, so much so there's this whole ecosystem of companies to help you figure out how much you might pay next month, right? That tells you if you've got a whole startup ecosystem and consolidation even in that ecosystem, then you've got pretty complicated pricing models. And so thinking ahead on, what there are going to be trade-offs between, oh, this makes it super simple for me to, hand this problem to the cloud, let them fire up a function as a service for me, and I don't, I can be super hands-off. There's a cost to that, right? Understand the pricing models behind it, because you will pay for that simplicity. You'll pay for that piece. And so kind of taking that step back, looking at pricing, understanding, how am I trying to set my goals and what am I hoping to achieve? Because there is going to be a balance between your effort to build something a little more deep in its integration into the cloud, which might turn out to be less expensive for you. It's something that takes advantage of every offload capability that you can get from a cloud, in which case you will pay more. And understanding those trade-offs and being conscious about it will go a long way towards not getting surprised later.
Indeed, yeah. So kind of have that sort of costing piece, that FinOps piece, involve your sort of CFO, involve everybody's kind of around that piece, and kind of trying to avoid some of the early sort of mistakes that people had with shadow IT and things like that, sort of 10 years ago or whatever. I think that's really still an ongoing concern, I think. So that still needs to be there. Okay, so let's take a sort of a deeper dive into sort of the journey to cloud. Where do you actually start? What are some of the sort of first things that you need to do? What's kind of been your sort of advice, and when you engage with with your sort of startup customers, SMB customers, you said, what are some of the things that you kind of take them through?
I think one of the things is there's this enormous community of people, and you're not really on your own. And this is, at DigitalOcean, this is one of our big things is the community is bigger than just us, is one of the things we have as a value. And the reason we do that is because you can learn so much from other people's mistakes. And most people are incredibly willing to share that information with you. And so getting out into the community, learning what people are using, what are the technologies, because in this world and day and age, the acronyms and the technology shifts on it feels like a daily basis sometimes. Yeah. Getting into the community and kind of understanding, well, who's trying to solve a problem technically similar to one I've done. You will find hundreds and hundreds of people who've probably hit exactly the same thing that you're trying to think through. And you can learn from their experience. And oftentimes they're sharing that on community pages. And so I think a really good starting place is that the community is a great place to learn. Trial balloons are not expensive. Test your ideas a little bit in the cloud in a wrapped area of your own. Play with it, learn about it, see what you think of it. The faster you can prototype something to play with, the faster you can decide that was a terrible idea. Let's try something slightly different, and then contribute that thought back. Right, help other people not have to go do that same prototype that didn't scale. I think that's usually where I try to start people is the community is such a powerful place to learn. Right.
Cool. Okay. And what about sort of other steps? You kind of how do you guys sort of engage with customers? I appreciate. I mean, probably, and again, you can probably correct me on it, but I appreciate not everybody, even startups with kind of sort of younger sort of teams, not necessarily sort of have all the ins and outs and sort of appreciate all the technologies that are out there. What's the latest? What's actually happening? Who's providing what? So would you guys kind of engage on things like sort of doing designs, as you said earlier, sort of learning from others, obviously from the communities, and kind of trying to really stay focused? I think one of the things that you said prior was kind of focusing in terms of the sort of things that you want to do. Are those all kind of playing in that space as you're sort of having those early discussions with your customers?
Yeah, they are. I think one of the over optimizing or premature optimization is quite the hobgoblin for a lot of people. And so maintaining that level of focus and kind of getting an understanding of what do I actually need to build? Like you said, kind of starting is the hardest thing to do, right? Because that first, that first idea, that first line of code, whatever it's going to end up being, taking the first step is usually the place where you struggle the most. And once you get going, it's back to that concept of having that plan, because if you don't have one, you're going to run down a bunch of different paths because you find it technically interesting, or you're just kind of, the team is wandering down this path trying to explore something, and you lose sight of what you were actually trying to solve for in the beginning. I've seen lots of people who are debating scalability and have no customers yet. And they're debating, these trade-offs in scale that are enormous, but they haven't proven that they have an idea anybody actually wants. And it's kind of keep yourself, it's a reality check. Keep yourself focused on the actual problem you need to solve today, not the one that you might have to solve a year from now. And that flexibility is probably one of the things I think challenges a lot of people, because especially, our focus is very much on technical folks and engineers. You want to solve the problem, you want to solve it, in quotes, correctly, i.e. you want to deeply think about this and get it right, and it should scale and it should do these things. And I agree with all of those as fundamental principles. But you also are running a business in most of these cases. And to do that, you also have this other side of the equation that is the trade-off. And whether that's limits in time, whether that's limits in money, whether that's somebody else may be executing on the same idea, you kind of want to have that fully rounded view of the trade-offs that you need to make. And oftentimes it is not driven by the correct, perfect technical solution. It's driven by, what do I actually need to do today or this month?
Okay, yeah. I mean, one of the things I was curious about as well was kind of just some of the contrasts between a startup organization or an SMB versus kind of a more established sort of enterprise. I was just curious to see some of the differences in terms of kind of that starting point, in terms of their, how their cultures kind of thinks or tries to adopt sort of cloud, and also in terms of, how they form their teams and kind of how technical they get into it. I've seen a lot of companies who are, let's say they are sort of an SMB, they have perhaps a CRM system, in-house in their data center, or they have an HR system or something. And then when they look to going to cloud or kind of modernizing that in the cloud, they just go SaaS. So they don't really bother with all the sort of details. They just, that SaaS platform ingests the data that they had from the previous platform, and the previous platform, the old platform, is jettisoned at that point. So that kind of SaaS seems to be a good way to get some of those very core sort of established, systems of record. If you're an enterprise architect, that's kind of the lingo for that, to actually bring that into the cloud. So rather than actually, if you're an established organization, you have to kind of go through all these steps, and we'll look at those in a minute briefly. But or if you're a startup, you kind of probably just born in the cloud, or go and adopt that SaaS application. Are you seeing some of that? What's the take on
100%. Yeah, I mean, for people who are starting up, you don't have a data center. You've got a bunch of people with laptops.
Might not even have an IT team.
Yeah, and well, in many cases you don't. I mean, even here at DigitalOcean, we started out, our IT team was a team of one for the longest time.
Okay.
Now our data center and cloud team was enormous because that was our core business. But you may not have IT for a very long time, and exactly what you said is there are a lot of even, you can think of them almost as boutique style SaaS services supporting these SMB businesses for HR or for CRM or other tooling. It's not always the biggest solution that wins. This is where that difference kicks in between enterprise and say SMB. In the enterprise space, you have robust processes. You've got a lot of weight behind these decisions because the decisions have a broad impact on a large number of people. And I think in SMBs and in startups, as things are getting off the ground, you're looking for the win. Okay, I do need an HR system that's actually required if I have employees. So how can I go get that problem solved and move to the next thing? And that's why SaaS is so attractive for those things. And it allows you to move quickly from that problem to your next problem. And ultimately, on the cloud side of things, solving your technical problems, you'll follow a lot of the same principles. I need a database. Do I want to install a database, configure that database, optimize that database, or do I want a DBaaS service so that I can go store the data that I'm creating and not worry about that problem of all those other components? And those are the trade-offs you see a lot of people making. I think technically you'll see that enterprise and SMB, or enterprise and startups, it's a lot of the same challenges. The gravity of the decisions tends to be different. So one of the, frankly, the more fun things about startups and and one of their biggest advantages is they'll move fast. If something is looking like a better answer, you will see that the startups have shifted long before the enterprises can take advantage of, because there's just so much momentum to turn a boat, and enterprises are really, really big boats. And so their ability to pivot is weak at best. That's usually their disadvantage, and that's the SMB's advantage.
Yeah, I was going to use the analogy of jet fighter versus an airliner. So kind of, changing course.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yes. I mean, from my sort of point of view, and feel free to, like I said, to sort of chip in on this as well if you have any comments. But yeah, I mean, we mentioned, I think, the difficulty for an established organization to kind of change that, make that sort of a huge change. And also, I think it's probably also more painful when it's actually a huge change that's going to take a long time to actually achieve. It's easier for sort of large organizations to maybe engage on one project from start to finish. Yes, it takes 6 months or whatever to deliver that. That's fine, but they have a starting point and an end point, and they have an end goal. Whereas we're kind of coming in. The cloud people are kind of coming in saying, no, it's a it's an end to end, so everything's going to change. Your whole culture has to change. And by the way, it's an iterative process. You just keep improving and innovating all the time. It's a non-stop kind of process. None of this, sort of have a 5-year plan anymore. It's, I used to say to customers, have a 1-year action plan where you're kind of having to do with all the immediate things that you need to do, the firefighting and things like that. Clear sort of roadmap. This is kind of where we want to be in 3 years. These are the sort of things we want to achieve, and a kind of a 5-year vision. But I've reduced that 5-year vision to somewhere between 3.5 to 4 years because of all the changes that you have to do and all the sort of iteration you have to do as well. And obviously, and as you said, kind of clouds move so fast, the technology moves so fast. If you just kind of, if you want a proof of that, just go and look at the CNCF chart for all of the projects, the open source projects that they look after, and see how that grows, from month to month. So definitely.
I think that's a totally great point, which is just, people, this is why Agile took off as a development methodology, because people would do waterfall planning as their sort of classic technique. And one of the challenges was you spent an enormous amount of time thinking through all the paths and all the options and all the possibilities and scoping and doing these things. And then you execute step one in that plan, and you need to pivot and change something. You just discovered something you couldn't have, you're never going to get it right. So I think that the whole concept of Agile was, you're never going to get it right, so iterate instead.
Indeed.
Get the first pieces done. And kind of to your point on, like, cloud is this continuous journey. You're never actually done, right? And no product in cloud is ever done, right? I mean, we are constantly looking at products and saying, now what do we do with it? What do we want to change next? And the same thing applies, which is, as you're doing those designs and you're laying things out, you're always iterating, you're always changing a little bit of your direction and taking advantage of the next new thing that pops up in CNCF's world, right? And saying, oh, well, that's an idea that I could take advantage of, because it solves a piece of the problem that I can see today. And you kind of jump into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the way that you sort of think about those projects and things, just simply needs to be ongoing, and hence the need for a team that's empowered, that can kind of go off and do that and fail fast. Let's not be afraid of actually failing on something. Let's fail on something quickly and learn from that, and sort of have that as a something in mind for the next time, and actually move forward. A lot of companies are just and teams are kind of just afraid of failing, and actually you learn a great deal from your failures. And I think that's really kind of the sort of the mentality that people really need to adopt going forward. So yes, I think, I mean, looking at it from a sort of an enterprise sort of high level point of view, and again, we're not going to be able to cover everything here, but certainly a sort of the decision to go to cloud needs to be a company decision. So it needs to be as I said earlier, sort of the endorsement from the C-level, not an IT decision. In the data center, people can kind of go off and buy servers and change, suppliers or whatever. That's fine. Nobody's going to know the difference. It's just IT is going to have the pain of that, but not anybody else. But in clouds, going to cloud is going to be, it's a different decision. And certainly, so yeah, having that sort of support of the stakeholders, I think, is really important. Cloud readiness, so having understanding of sort of where your strategy is, your sort of endorsements is there. For the finance team is engaged, because obviously their process is going to change. Procurement is going to change. The skill set, having candidates for the CCOE and kind of formation of that is all again, very important. And I would say a lot of people kind of tend to differ on this, but I would say forming the CCOE, if your organization is large enough to have a dedicated CCOE, if you're not, you can have like a virtual CCOE team. But certainly having that formed early on, as early as possible, I think is really important, because they would be able to set a strategy, work or choose their consulting partners, make that selection, adopt a DevOps approach to the process, establish and bring in governance. So that's all kind of the regulation, security, etc. And start doing practical things. Doing a proof of concept. Reaching a sort of a MVP, a minimal viable product sort of level. And then you're only then really you can kind of start looking at your apps and data and looking at doing things like assessments, dependency mapping of the applications with the backend databases and things like that, and how that's all going to determine. There's lots of different ways, obviously, to do that. I'm sure you guys have done that, so we won't kind of dwell on the 6 R's of migration and things like that. That's all fairly well established. But then as that's happening, you'd also kind of need to look at, a separate part of that CCOE team needs to look at things like the landing zone. So your cloud infrastructure, the tooling, the automation, the scripting that's required, and the frameworks really that you're going to adopt, around that sort of deployment. And then you really want to move quickly to your POC. Some people call it POC. Some others call it a sort of a beacon project, lighthouse project. I've heard all sorts of different sort of terms, but really it's just kind of your first project in the cloud. And having that sort of poster child migration project succeed is really crucial. And actually having stakeholder support, really crucial. I mean, I've built cloud solutions for customers in the past, and no stakeholders wanted to be the first to kind of volunteer and migrate their application into the cloud. So it's really hard, actually, even once you've done all that homework. It's very difficult to kind of get customers to.
It's one of these things where you line everybody up and everybody takes one step backwards. Except
exactly.
For the person you then get a call on.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's really hard. I mean, once you've, I would say for that, and again, this is probably an unwritten rule, is to look at the low hanging fruit. What's the easiest, maybe even cloud aware, and dare I say a cloud native, an existing cloud native sort of application that you can just happen to end up in the wrong location, being in the data center, you can now actually kind of try and get it into, migrate it into the cloud. And a lot of I think some of the more modern sort of collab applications, chat applications that people use and so on are fairly modular in that way. They're, maybe running on a container or something like that. So they should be easier. They're your sort of low hanging fruits. I wouldn't touch the HR system and say, yeah, well, that's the first one we're going to do, or the sales, CRM system, or ERP or something like that. Those are the major headaches that you leave late, and maybe actually they never make it into the cloud. So depending on kind of what they are and how old they are.
But I think that you raise a really good point here, which ties back to something you said a few minutes ago about risk and failure. Because I often tell people I learned way more throughout my career on the things that just did not go well. Because those are the things you learn the lesson when you make the mistake yourself, right? And so I think the cultural change you mentioned before is super important, which is you want people to feel like failure is a learning experience, not a punishable offense.
Exactly.
Right? And if you're never failing, then you're not taking risk. And if you're not taking risk, you're going to be leaving success, behind. And I think that getting people to, in that line, you want everybody taking one step forward saying, I think I could try something like in my area. And too often it's what you said, which is people want to take the step back because they're fearful of risk, and they're fearful of risk because the reward system has not been pivoted towards risk taking and incremental learning is how you can move forward quickly. And that is really important to kind of have as an established culture, is reward the risk takers, because you want them to stand up and say, here's everything that went wrong. And here's how we can avoid it. And that's that learning culture, right? It's that continuous learning culture that you want.
Yeah, and I think it's part of it's the responsibility of the C-level and the CCOE to really take everybody on the journey, to actually get everybody excited and not leave anybody behind. Not go to the stakeholders last minute to make a request to them to migrate their apps, or say, you're migrating whether you like it or not. I don't think that's really going to work in any sort of situation. And in terms of making mistakes, yes, one of the things I really picked up from a previous company I worked for was they used to call them blameless retrospectives, and I thought that was a fantastic term, a great way to, it already tells you how you're going to look at this. It already tells you nobody's going to be blamed. It's going to, you're just going to learn from the mistake and move forward. And I think that's a really
we
great
use
term
blameless
to
here
have.
at DigitalOcean. That is one of the ways that
Yeah.
we try to do our retrospectives, which is,
Yeah,
it's not
fantastic.
about who made what mistake. It's about what have we learned from what went wrong.
Exactly. I mean, I'm all for identifying what the problem was, but it's really about kind of learning. And I think CCOE and C-level as the kind of, the organizations moving into the cloud, that's the kind of thing they need to really adopt with that. So I think only then, really, once you've kind of got this sort of, MVP, POC kind of proved and kind of maybe migrated one out, can you only then really look at the sort of turning that whole process into a migration factory, an application migration factory. I learned this from a previous customer, actually had a specific team that they call themselves the migration factory, which is really great because I think they were kind of, assigned to work on that process and actually improve that process as they, again, went along, through that and sort of got experience. They had like 800 plus applications to migrate at that point. And I was kind of, talking to them about automation and how we can automate as much of that process, as possible, and apply sort of those types of frameworks on that process. I mean, it's never going to be like 100% because obviously there's going to be a sort of a human decision that needs to be made after you've kind of applied all of your standard stuff like the 6 R's sort of a migration and things like that. But the point is that you have now a potentially dedicated team, depending on your size, to actually go through that sort of migration effort. So I think once you've kind of got there, operations is really sort of next. Once you've kind of gone live, and I'm pretty sure I'm skipping a lot of stuff like testing and user acceptance testing and the UX, that kind of stuff. But once you've kind of got over all of that, and you now have your poster child, as we said earlier, obviously you can go back and advertise that within the rest of the organization and the stakeholders, actually show off the great results that you've achieved in cloud and how that is more resilient, is backed up better, it's recoverable more easily, scalable, it's performant, and so on. That's really where kind of your standard ops comes in. So you mentioned observability a couple of times. Yeah, absolutely part of that sort of process as well. And security, of course, having that in place. So again, the users are essentially, or hopefully all your customers are essentially none the wiser, in terms of or after subsequent to the migration, and then having things like service management, so all the usual kind of ticketing and things like that, and then you're probably looking at performance, scalability, and things like that along that process. You kind of that observability extends into those areas as well, so you can actually maintain that sort of requirement. And then really, I mean, it's about, as we said, it's about iterating, keep planning, migrating, continue to provision. And now you can actually, for the first time, you can go around and say, we are a cloud first organization. Our IT team is a cloud first team.
Cool. Yep. I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so just kind of conscious of the time, we'll to give some time for the Q&A towards the end. So just wanted to kind of summarize best practices, Barry. What are your kind of 3 takeaways from the talk?
Yeah, I think one is it's a pair, right? So plan ahead, but as we were talking about, this isn't the 3-year, take 6 months to do the 3-year plan kind of style, but just kind of set some goals, understand where you want to be, keep tabs on the plan as you're going forward. I think that's super important. I think leveraging the community is incredibly important. You don't need to make the same mistake somebody else made when you could have read the document that they wrote explaining it. Learn from others' mistakes, leverage communities. Don't get too far ahead of yourself. The rock polishing, as people like to say.
Yes.
Stay focused on the problem you've set out to solve, right? By laying that plan out. The 2 other things, I know you said 3 and I'm on like number 4 already, is observability. I can't harp on enough. The saying is you can't manage what you aren't monitoring. If you don't build that in, you will not know what is going on behind the scenes. And you
Yes.
just really got to think about that at the outset. You know, it's such a critical piece of functionality. And that last one I wanted to mention again, even though we've mentioned it once before, is cost. You know what you're getting into, because I've seen a lot of, especially on the smaller side, you know, I see a lot of these SMBs and smaller businesses. If you're not thinking about, hey, which cloud gives me the best bang for the buck? You know, what's the one that I know what my pricing is going to look like? I know which of these components I want to leverage because I can understand and plan for the cost. If you don't do that, you're going to be surprised.
Indeed. Yeah. No, I completely agree with this. And just to kind of add sort of my takeaways on that. Yeah. Again, for, you know, more established organizations, definitely C-level endorsement. If you're not going to get that, it's dead in the water. It's never going to take off. I think you really need to have all the way from the, you know, from the CEO down endorsement that this is going to happen, and that, you know, the money, the budget is going to be there to make this happen. Second, I think for me would be empowerment. So empowering that IT team, CCOE team, whatever it is that you're going to sort of set up, certainly needs to be, it doesn't have to be a dedicated team. It could be a virtual team, as we said earlier, but certainly have that.
Last 5 minutes, guys.
You know, empowered, and certainly make sure that you know, they have that sort of capability, so they can actually make the decisions, and they are backed up when they make up those, you know, when they make those decisions. I think that's really important. And then the third thing is, as you're going through all of that, you know, focusing on things like culture, your processes are going to change. You know, bring the whole IT team, the rest of the IT team with you, all the people, you know, other parts of the organization. You know, get them excited about moving to the cloud, and sort of talk about some, you know, some of the advantages of you know, of doing this. And I think those are all really important things. Barry, any sort of last
generally getting people excited about moving to cloud is usually not hard. You know, you take engineers and you say, would you like another crack at redesigning this or thinking about this differently and leveraging some you know, modern, or maybe I'll say more modern technologies? Usually, you know, you have them at hello at that point, right? That's like gold for an engineer to get to rethink the problem. So it's a good first step.
Indeed. Excellent. Well, it's been a fantastic talk. I've really enjoyed doing it. I've learned so much, as usual, from all my talks, from all my guests and everybody who I speak to. So I really appreciate everything that you've said, Barry. Really good input, lots of thought leadership, which I really appreciate. I think that's been very valuable. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, I think we can certainly take those. Just one final reminder to urge anybody who's attending and looking at the rest of the conference, to urge you to look at all of them, check out all of the other sessions that you may have missed. Maybe you were kind of watching one in one area and one other section was going, another session was going on in another section somewhere else. Do go and check those out. I think there's lots of good material. I had a quick look through a lot of them, sat through a couple of them today as well, and I found them really, really insightful and lots of really fantastic information. And I always kind of regret not being able, you know, when there's things that are overlapping. I don't know about you, Barry, but when things overlap, it's always quite difficult. It's kind of, oh, darn it, I want to go and you know, I want to go into that one, but it's kind of clashing with something else. But yeah, I urge everybody to go and you know, check out all the other sessions. You're here, you've made the time. Really appreciate you doing that. And yeah, I wish you, you know, I hope everybody's enjoyed the session and enjoy the rest of the talks as well. Now, Barry, I'm just going to see if there are any questions for us. I know that some people have been going through the talks. So let me just some entries in the chat. Okay. Yeah, don't be shy if you want to ask any questions. I think there's one actually here. Let me just okay, I'm not quite sure I understand that. I think it's about cloud operations and any plans related to email.
Yeah. So I think the question is, so DO offers various as a service technologies. And I think the question is just asking, are we planning on offering an email service?
Okay.
So the way that we are looking at that is we have a marketplace where we partner on some things. And so through partnership is going to be the path we'll likely pursue for email services versus kind of rolling our own. But thank you for the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Thank you. Apologies, I'm probably butchering the text. I'm struggling to read it here. But yeah, I mean, anybody else, if anybody else has any questions, more than happy to ask. I think we're going to try and do sort of hanging around somewhere in the lounge, Barry, you and I think,
Yes.
after this. So if people still want to have any, if they have any questions or whatever on sort of cloud migration, stuff like that, or, you know, pick Barry's brains further on DigitalOcean's solutions and platforms, by all means do that. I will just mark that as answered. Let's see if there is any other ones here. I can't see anything else. Let me just check the chat. Some good thank yous. Thank you for all the thank yous. Appreciate that. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I think we're pretty much there. So again, thank you, Barry, for your time. Thanks for all your input and insights. It's been a great talk. And I'll probably see you hopefully on my YouTube channel at some point.
Yeah, indeed. I'm looking forward to that, Richard. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for attending. I hope you're enjoying the conference and you got something useful out of this.